Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, okay, good.
Good evening. Welcome to the 2026 Leslie G. Rood Memorial Lecture. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Zoe Peart. I am a sophomore here. I major in both political science and criminal justice with a minor in legal studies. I would like to first thank the Hartwick Institute of Public Service for helping organize this event. I'd also like to thank Darlene for the catering and providing some snacks for our speaker earlier, and also the entire technology services team here at Hartwick for helping us with the live stream on YouTube and for helping us set up everything. So before I introduce our guests today, let me first say a few words about just the lecture series itself. So this series was established after Leslie Rood's death in 1998 by fellow Hartwick colleagues Norma Hutman and Marion Rood, and it was in honor of of Leslie's extraordinary work here, both as a professor and as an administrator. The purpose of this lecture is to reflect on Professor Rood's passionate interest in political science and public life and public speaking by asking prominent speakers to share their own expertise and experiences with the Hartwick community. As students, this also gives us an amazing opportunity to see how what we may study in the classroom can translate into real world impact and experiences. And this year's prominent speaker is a four-term state senator after serving 3 terms in the New York State Assembly. He's currently the chair of the state's Committee on Investigations, where he has routinely held public officials, including governors of both parties, to account. Additionally, you may have seen him in more national news cycles as the candidate to chair the Democratic National Committee before ultimately dropping out and endorsing our eventual winner, Ken Martin, and later being named as the DNC's Advisory People's Cabinet. Even before any of that, our guest speaker today was also the town councilman in his hometown in Woodbury, New York. He obtained his undergraduate degree in political science from the George Washington University before receiving his master's degree from Columbia University, also in political science. This is just to say that our guest speaker today is a perfect embodiment of the goals of Leslie Rood's lecture series, as he has devoted his entire career to public service through politics. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, New York State Senator James Skoufis.
Thank you, Zoe. Really delighted to be with all of you. Hope you're all having a nice evening. First, before I get started, please give it up for Zoe. You have Dr. Chick. You have Dr. Who's your co-director? Elder, the IT team, all the organizers, Dr. McKinney, everyone who pulled this all together. Please give them a round of applause. And the Institute for Public Service for having me as well. I'm really honored to be with all of you. I came straight from Albany. I came with Joe Mangan, who's on my team. We had session today. And driving to Hartwick, it's really a beautiful trek to get here. And it's my first time here at Hartwick. This is an incredible place. I hope you don't take for granted. In Orange County, my district, I represent a little over 300,000 people. And if you don't know where Woodbury, New York is, think Woodbury Commons. Now you all know where Woodbury is, my hometown. And in our Senate district of over 300,000 people, we have 0 4-year colleges. You have 2 in a community of 7,000 to 8,000 people here in Oneonta. This is very special. What you have here is incredible. And again, I'm really humbled and honored to join you. And so I was going to start with just 30 seconds, a little bit about me, but I think Zoe has that covered. So the only other thing I'll just mention real quickly about me that is maybe most important, that was not mentioned by Zoe, is that I have, if the clicker wants to work, I have known Dr. Chick for 25 years. We went to high school together, middle school as well, and so I had an in as it relates to this invitation. Thanks, Dr. Chick. It might have been on a cruise, yeah. So I want to do something a little bit, I think perhaps different than I got a taste of what some of your previous guest lecturers, have shared in years past. And I want to start on something that doesn't get a lot of attention, and then I'm going to zoom out. So I'm going to start with policy, and then I'm going to zoom out and talk about politics a little bit. We obviously live in a high-tax state here in New York. And by the way, I'm a Democrat, and I acknowledge that. I think we should all be able to acknowledge that we pay a lot of taxes here in New York. And we all talk about what the drivers of that high tax structure that we contribute towards. One of the drivers that very few people talk about is the matter of fact, to the tune of billions of dollars every year, we provide abatements to companies that then don't pay taxes, that then drive up the costs and taxes for everyone else who has to make up the difference. Does anyone, before I get to this first example here, does anyone want to guess how many millions of dollars we spend in our New York State budget every year on film and TV subsidies? Any guesses? How many millions of dollars annually? 23. We spend $800 million a year, every year, on subsidizing the film and TV industry. And do you know what our return on investment for that program is? It's about 30 cents on the dollar. And it's one of the reasons why we have a large budget. It's one of the reasons why we have very high personal income tax rates and other taxes and fees in our budget. We also spend about $400 million on a very large program for Broadway tax credits, Broadway subsidies. Hartwick's operating budget is about $50 million. You can build and operate about 15 Hartwicks with the money that we spend annually on film and TV subsidization. So that just puts things in perspective, how much we abate, how much we spend. We're going to talk about local abatements and a significant driver of property taxes specifically. So the first example, and I want to share a couple of examples that illustrate what I would argue are the depths of this problem and this challenge. The first example is a story out of the New York Times from a number of years ago that highlighted basically a scam whereby, in this story, but it's certainly emblematic of a much larger problem, 12 companies in New Jersey ripped off New Jersey taxpayers to the tune of over $100 million. There is a bit of a New York nexus here. These are all internationally renowned companies of the 12. They're all in northern New Jersey. They include Jaguar, for example, that's headquartered in Bergen County in northern New Jersey. And every one of the 12 threatened to move to the very same business park right across the state boundary in Rockland County, New York. And many of them hired the same exact lobbyists to apply for these tax credits with New Jersey's Office of Economic Development. Many of them hired the same lawyers to file those applications with the state of New Jersey. And every single one of them pointed to, well, if we don't get this money, we're going to leave and move to this business park right across the state line. And every single one of them got the awards that they were looking for from New Jersey and remained in New Jersey, headquartered in the state. The New York Times did what I would argue is the most basic of investigative efforts, and which clearly New Jersey did not undertake. For example, the New York Times reporter called the real estate leasing agent for the business park. Have you gotten any calls or visits from any of these 12 companies? Lo and behold, not a single one of them made even a phone call, never mind a visit, to the business park they were all threatening to move to. A number of the companies claimed that they were pursuing incentives from the Rockland County IDA. And I'll pause for a moment and explain if you don't know. Every county in the state has an industrial development agency, or IDA. There are also many towns and cities within those counties that also have their own separate IDAs. And so some of these, and these are the agencies that selectively provide property tax, among other abatements to companies, to applicants. And so some of them claimed that they went to the Rockland County IDA and were pursuing tax breaks in anticipation of this possible move to this business park. The New York Times reporter called up the Rockland County IDA executive director, who flatly told the reporter that he had never heard of any of these companies approach the Rockland County IDA. And so, fair to say that every single one of these applicants lied and got away with it to the tune of over $100 million. And these are just the 12 that the New York Times found out about. No doubt many more. Another one here, more local to my district in Orange County. There's a national medical supply distributor by the name of Medline. They've got warehouses, hubs all over the country. They're headquartered in Illinois. And they have a regional distribution hub in Orange County that they built and had been operating out of near Middletown, New York, in a town called Wawayanda. At the time, many, many years ago, they received a 10-year pilot payment in lieu of taxes, which is the standard property tax abatement that these IDAs, these agencies, provide to applicants. They got a 10-year pilot for this warehouse they built and were operating out of for exactly 10 years. And just at the point where they were about to start paying full property taxes and their abatement, their tax break, was about to expire, what a coincidence, they decided, well, we're actually going to move up the street 2 towns over and build a new warehouse and apply for a whole new pilot. And so they attempted to go to the town of Montgomery, first the Orange County IDA. They decided, well, we're not going to get a good enough deal, a generous enough deal from the Orange County IDA, so we're actually going to go to the town of Montgomery IDA and get a better deal. They purchased the property for $17 million that they were going to build this warehouse on. They spent millions of additional dollars on engineering and architectural reviews and all sorts of other soft costs. They had already applied for and been awarded a $10 million tax credit from New York State, separate from the local property taxes, and yet they were still going to the local IDA and threatening, claiming, well, if we don't get the property tax break, we're going to leave for New Jersey or Pennsylvania. And implicitly, part of that, I suppose, is give up, forego a $10 million award from New York State, eat a $17 million real estate transaction that they just purchased, this property, and retrain over 100 employees that were based right down the street that had been working out of this previous site. Because if they're moving to New Jersey or Pennsylvania, they've got to lay off and rehire their entire workforce. That did not pass the smell test, certainly to myself, nor to anyone who I argue has 2 brain cells in their head. And as chair of investigations, I opened up a formal Senate investigation into this tax break application. And we sent out something called document requests. We wanted emails. We wanted all the communications and other documentation to reveal that this no doubt was a planned scheme to self-enrich at the expense of taxpayers. And again, when this happens, and it happens with so much more frequency than probably most folks in this room realize, what happens is everyone else in that taxing jurisdiction, the school district, the town, the county, has to make up the difference for these tax abatements. And so in these document requests, the way they work is we do pages and pages of questions, and we want all of these things by this deadline, and if you don't comply by this deadline, then we issue subpoenas, or we threaten to issue subpoenas to get the information. Lo and behold, on the very day that all of these documents were due back to me and my committee, and the day before we were about to start pursuing subpoenas because we were not hearing back, Medline puts out a press release announcing that they are withdrawing their tax break application, but nevertheless still moving forward with their project. They got caught with their pants down, and taxpayers, fortunately, were the beneficiary of all of this, this shaming, quite frankly, that we were involved in. The last example I want to highlight here, it's a more modest one, but this is among even the most egregious I've ever seen. I've probably reviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these applications for property tax breaks over my years in the state legislature. I think it's fair to say, and I think my colleagues would tell you or anybody that I am more focused on IDAs and wrongful property tax breaks and other economic development wrongfulness, probably more than any other state legislator in New York. And despite all the attention, all the focus, all of the hundreds of applications I've reviewed over the years, I've never seen this until this application. State law requires that these property tax break applications ask a number of questions. One of them is reflective of what we call the but-for question in economic development. But for this tax break, would the project still happen? And if the answer to that is no, then legally, according to state law, the IDA is allowed to consider the tax break. If the project would happen without the tax break, it is technically illegal for that agency to consider the tax break. And so one of the questions on every application is, will this project move forward if you don't get assistance from this IDA? And I have never, ever, ever, ever seen anyone check the yes box. And surely some of the applications where the no box is checked, they are being honest and they genuinely need the assistance in order for the project to materialize and to make the numbers work. I am not someone who's up here who's going to claim that there's never any instances where there is financial assistance required. These guys check the yes box, and they're a food manufacturer in Orange County. And if I'm the IDA, dare I say, if anyone in this room is running the IDA, the moment you get that application back and you see the yes box checked, I would say, I think most people here, all of you would probably say, thank you very much for your time, good luck with your project, and the application then goes in the trash bin. This IDA, and sadly, tragically, I think most IDAs would operate with this same attitude. The Orange County IDA nevertheless granted them $3 million in subsidies, ostensibly arguing that the jobs, the handful of jobs that would be created a year or two sooner or quicker than if they did not get the abatement. Right, so what can be done about all this? There are a variety of reforms that are being considered as legislation. I carry many of these bills that speak to better oversight, better transparency, better accountability within this decision-making structure, both for state programs as well as for these local agencies that dole out property tax breaks and sales tax breaks. We have actually, on paper, a state watchdog, an office called the Authorities and Budget Office, the ABO, that ostensibly is supposed to be monitoring and tracking not just IDAs, but all public authorities. And public authorities range from, there are some water authorities in some communities to the MTA is an authority that is supposed to be responsive to the ABO. But the type of public authority that consumes most of the ABO's work are IDAs. Nevertheless, the ABO basically has no power. They're able to do audits, they're able to issue reports, they're able to issue recommendations, but virtually nothing that they do is binding. They virtually have zero actual teeth or enforcement authority, and certainly there are folks like myself who are trying to change that. And then the last I'll mention here on this slide is that, similar to this conversation, we need to raise the public awareness. We need to elevate the conversation around this activity. 99% of people, at least outside of Orange County, and I'll get to this and why Orange County I think is unique in a moment, the vast majority of the public has no idea what an IDA even is, never mind what they do. If you were to ever go to an IDA meeting, and they're public meetings, they're subject to open meetings law, they're subject to the Freedom of Information law here in New York, you'd be the only person in the audience if you went to your local IDA monthly board meeting. And that is why these economic development, so-called economic development officials are able to get away with what they get away with, because no one's watching them. No one's paying attention to what they're doing. And I understand, people have busy lives, they work, they send their kids to school, they're trying to put food on the table and pay their bills. Who has time to go to an IDA meeting? But this is, again, one of the reasons why, as it relates to IDAs, property taxes are so high in New York State, because many of these awards are unwarranted. The projects would be happening anyway. The prime example whereby, and it's one of the only times I've ever seen in the entire state a tax break application voted down by one of these boards, because these are votes. They have to affirmatively vote. It's not just like one executive director who gets to like unilaterally make a decision. There is a board, and they have to vote. The only time I can remember ever seeing a property tax break voted down was out in Suffolk County on Long Island a couple of years ago, where an application elicited significant attention for whatever reason by the teachers union in that school district. And this applicant, this business, was looking to get a major property tax break that would have affected the school district's budget. And in this one instance, the local teachers association mobilized their members to show up to this monthly meeting of the Suffolk County IDA. And these are board members who had gotten used to, as all these board members do, operating in the darkness. And now suddenly it was 150, 200, 250 teachers crammed into their little board meeting room, and they were all shaking in their boots because they had to actually look the teachers in the face and make this decision. And when confronted with that dynamic, they made the right decision. Lo and behold, go figure, they voted down the application. By the way, the project still moved forward. So what have we done? So the last slide was what can be done, what have we done? One of the reforms I'm most proud of, that I'm proudest of, is in this space, is the Orange County IDA is the only IDA in the entire state, and there are over 100 IDAs in the state, that has a state-appointed monitor. And that was my doing. Several years ago, in the state budget, it was a massive war with my county executive, with my county legislature, which was just parroting the county executive, with the IDA, with all the economic development officials, with the Contractors Association in Orange County. And we were able to plug into the state budget a first-of-its-kind state monitor embedded within the IDA that I represent. This monitor watches their every move, has access to every document, every meeting, including closed executive sessions, and importantly has veto power. And just the threat of veto power has deterred bad actors from applying for tax breaks, knowing that they wouldn't be able to get through what had previously been the rubber stamping operation of the IDA. There was going to be scrutiny. Many of them knew they wouldn't be able to get away with what historically had been gotten away with, and so they wouldn't even apply. And this, I would argue, this monitor has saved my taxpayers untold tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 3 years. The monitor has only had to issue a veto one single time. The threat had been effective enough, except for the end of this past year. Amazon wanted to build the largest, what would be the largest warehouse in all of New York State in Orange County. A several million square foot warehouse, and they wanted $80 million in property tax breaks to do it. And same story that the IDAs often hear: if we don't get this money, we're going to New Jersey, we're going to Pennsylvania, whatever. Losing sight of the fact the IDA lost sight of the fact, as they normally do, that Amazon needs these warehouses in communities because they need the distribution in those communities. We don't need to roll out red carpets for warehouses and distribution. There is in some headquarters, there is a big map of the United States with red push pins in that headquarters of all of their distribution hubs at Amazon. And periodically, and I'm distilling this, but you get the point, periodically, their executives look at that map and say, well, we're not reaching our Amazon Prime customers there. We need to build a new warehouse in the Hudson Valley. That's how they determine where to build these distribution facilities. They are going to build this distribution facility whether they get $80 million or not, in my very strong opinion. And I made that case, as did many, many people in the community. As you could see in that last point, over 1,000 constituents just in that immediate town and the surrounding towns signed a petition opposing this pilot. And the monitor heard us, and he vetoed what was an otherwise approved $80 million property tax abatement. The IDA and Amazon subsequently sued, and we are in court right now. The monitor and the state are defending that veto. The second point here, I want to circle back to something I mentioned on the previous slide, where I noted almost everyone doesn't even know anything about this outside of Orange County. Orange County is an exception, and it's because I've elevated this issue so much and made this an enormous priority of my work. I do a poll every couple of years for my election, and as just some political backdrop, I represent the most Republican district held by a Democrat in New York State, in the New York State Senate. Donald Trump won my district 3 times. Most recently, he won it by a margin of 12 percentage points. I was reelected by 14. I'm very grateful that many non-Democrats vote for me. And it's in large part because of issues like this. But I poll every couple of years, and we do what's called a benchmark poll, which typically in the summertime. And it's the first of several polls we do over the course of the campaign. And a benchmark poll, if you've ever gotten one of these calls, it's a really long, annoying poll that's like 20, 25 minutes long. It's not one of these like really quick, like who would you vote for polls. And it tests biography, like my biography versus my opponent's biography. It tests all of my positive messaging, like the accomplishments that I want to run on to see which accomplishments elicit a better response from voters. We test negative messaging, potential attacks. Like that's what a benchmark poll is. And my last several elections, the number one positive polling issue and message in my 42nd State Senate district was holding corporations accountable and scrutinizing corporate welfare. Not abortion, not education, not any of these guns, none of these big issues, healthcare, none of these very big ticket issues that no doubt in almost any other Senate district in any other poll in New York State would register as the number one or one of the top. IDAs and corporate welfare registers as the number one issue in my district. And it's because people actually know what IDAs are, thanks to my office and the work that we've done in elevating this problem. And that needs to happen everywhere else in the state to solve this problem. Okay, so we talked about what can be done, what have we done. Now and there's some overlap here, but what needs to be done? And this is timely. The state monitor I mentioned before that was enacted 3 years ago has a 3-year term. And so he's up for renewal this year. And it's another big fight, and the same people who fought it last time are fighting it this time, except they realize that they're probably going to lose this fight, much like they did last time. It's actually a lot easier to renew something in the state legislature than it is to get something into the budget for the first time. And the IDA, by me, actually hired a lobbyist, which is its own separate ridiculous problem. They're using public funds to pay for a lobbyist to try and do away with oversight. That aside, their lobbyist has told them you're going to lose this fight and you need to negotiate. And so for the first time in many, many years, the IDA actually came to me and said, can we please talk? And I said, sure. And I told them, though, I'm happy to talk, I'm happy to negotiate, but understand you're sitting at a poker table with no clothes on. You have no leverage. And if you want this monitor to be wound down, there's going to need to be very significant, from your perspective, their perspective, painful reforms. And so we're engaged in conversations right now, started a few weeks ago. One way or the other, they're going to end in the next 2 or 3 weeks because the budget's going to be done sooner rather than later. And among the reforms that we're talking about, I'll mention in these next few slides. The first is the state monitor a couple of months ago identified and discovered, so all these pilots, these tax breaks are handed out. The monitor identified that a full half of the active tax breaks that are in Orange County, issued by the Orange County IDA, a full half are not meeting their job promises that were articulated in their applications. And that's part of the agreement. They get a tax break for creating some specific number of jobs that are promised in an application. The IDA wasn't tracking whether these jobs were being created. Only because the monitor is there that we even know this. And some of these tax breaks are 5, 10 years old. These weren't issued yesterday or last month or a couple months ago. And the IDA wasn't even tracking whether those commitments were being upheld. And so the first thing that, quite frankly, should be the easiest is making sure that New York, every single agency that deals in this space has proper and full tracking of all of the promises that are being made in exchange for these incentives. The second, and this has become a flashpoint in my talks with the Orange County IDA, and quite frankly, if this negotiation blows up, it's going to be over this item right here. I am adamant, and I've told them it's non-negotiable, that the taxing jurisdictions, so the village if it's a village, the town, the school district, they need to have a seat at the table. At the end of the day, the IDA is making these decisions to provide property tax breaks that don't impact the IDA's budget, doesn't impact the IDA's finances. When the IDA boards vote for these tax breaks, it impacts the village's budget. It impacts the town's budget. It impacts the school district's budget, and they have zero say under the law. And so one of, if not the main reform that is critical in my instance, and that I would argue is critical to bring statewide, is to allow the taxing jurisdictions, the leaders, the mayor, the supervisor, the school board or administrator, to be able to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to these incentives. Let them determine whether the hit on their budget is worth the incentive and the commitments and the promises and the project. And that again assumes an incentive is needed for the project to begin with. So effectively this would be veto power. If a school district does not want to be a part of a pilot, they would be able to say no and effectively veto it. The others could say yes if they want, but it's important that they be given a seat at the table. And then this speaks to one or two of the examples at the start of the presentation. It's important that we actually investigate the veracity of these threats and these claims that many of these applicants make. Again, a simple set of phone calls from a New York Times reporter revealed a scam worth over $100 million. And if a New York Times reporter can make those couple of calls, certainly the IDAs and the state offices also that deal with incentives should be able to do some basic investigative work as well. And so this is the third critical point that would be a game changer. And so my hope is that, and it's a microcosm, but my hope is that if we're able to do these things in the next several weeks in Orange County, and we can come to a global agreement, myself and the IDA and some other folks, it will serve as a model for the rest of the state. Because far too often, if not all the time, when we talk about things like this, it elicits responses from economic development officials, well, this would destroy economic development in New York State. we'll never have another project come to our community ever again. If a school district, God forbid, was able to have a say in whether incentives move forward or not, which is patently ridiculous. And so if we're able to do this, and it works, and it would work, I have the highest level of certainty that this will not deleteriously affect economic development, but will protect taxpayers. We'll be able to go back to my colleagues, your senators, your assembly members, and point to, well, this is working in Orange County, I want it here as well. And then I believe this is the last of the key reforms. So the Amazon project I mentioned before, that was seeking $80 million in property tax breaks. You know what the average, 90% of the jobs they were going to create, what the average salary of those 90% of jobs, in their own application, their own numbers, was stated as $37,000 a year. They wanted taxpayer support to build the largest warehouse in all of New York State as the second or third most profitable company in the entire world, and they were going to pay 90% of their employees an average salary of $37,000 a year. Implicit in any tax incentive and agreement should be, and I would argue is, that the jobs to be created with the taxpayers' support ought to be good-paying jobs, and they ought to have medical benefits. And so this is the last point that is critical. If we're going to give these incentives, the jobs to be created should not be minimum wage jobs. And so now I want to zoom out a little bit. Hopefully I've given you at least a broad overview of, I would argue, a major problem that does not get anywhere near the attention that it deserves here in New York State. So now I'm going to sort of put aside my policy hat, and I'm going to put on a bit of a political hat for a moment, if you'll bear with me. And by the way, this is not, even though I'm a Democrat, this applies to both parties, in my opinion, what I'm about to say. There are two candidates that come to immediate recent mind that have, I think, sort of cracked the code as it relates to what voters are looking for in this country, and in one instance here in the state. And that is that the average person who is just scraping by, and especially young people who have grown so cynical of politics, who thinks that almost all politicians are not looking out for their best interests and are more, quite frankly, engaged in political warfare than actually solving problems in this country. There are two candidates that I think have sort of cracked the code. One, and he's not my politics within the party, is Zohran Mamdani in New York City. And the other, just this past Tuesday, a couple days ago, there was a U.S. Senate Democratic primary in Texas. And one of the two candidates, and they're both, one's a member of Congress, and the other, who I'm about to refer to, is a state house member, James Tallarico. They were articulating a different type of politics, and that is that what most people are interested in right now is not a left versus right or a Democratic versus Republican mentality or a liberal conservative. It is a top-bottom dynamic. And by the way, James Tallarico won, and obviously Zohran is the mayor of New York City. They both gave people a reason to vote for them and challenged this power paradigm that exists, whereby, again, instead of talking about ideologies, it's more about who has power and who doesn't in this country. And what type of people should government be looking out for, and what type of people shouldn't government be looking out for? And so in the case of economic development and IDAs, these very large corporations, they have lobbyists, they have lawyers that go to these IDA board meetings, as I mentioned before in the New Jersey and Rockland County example. You had entire consulting firms and legal teams that cooked up this scheme and effectuated this scheme. Those types of actors do not need public officials like myself looking out for them. They have plenty of resources and plenty of existing power and influence to look out for themselves. It's in New York City, it's the recent college graduate who has a degree and is earning almost $100,000 and yet can't even afford a studio apartment with 3 roommates who needs government to start looking out for them. And again, we can talk about whether Zoran's politics is the politics people agree. That's not the point. The point is, he was running against Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, I can't stand as a Democrat. I served with him for a long time. He's running against Andrew Cuomo, who is talking about the same things he had been talking about 10, 15 years prior, and taking campaign contributions from the same powerful individuals, whether they be landlords or corporations or business owners. And I'm not looking to demonize those folks. In fact, I want them in New York State. They're major taxpayers in New York State, but they don't need us to look out for them in the halls of the state capitol or the halls of City Hall. It's everyone else that does. And so again, these are the folks, they have access, they have money, directly or indirectly, they help write the rules and laws. And for everyone else, the system feels rigged. James Tallarico in Texas, who I mentioned, he is a moderate state lawmaker in the state house in Texas. And do you know where he had his highest margins of victory? Which counties in Texas? The counties that Bernie Sanders won when he ran for president. And their ideologies could not be more different, but they both won in those places because they were both talking about this top-down power structure that they were looking to take on. So again, I'm going to put on now my Democratic Party hat. This is why Democrats have, I would argue, nationally struggled. If there's one theme, if there's one problem to pinpoint, it is that working class people, and they've been drifting for many years. Now they're, especially white working class individuals, have almost completely left the Democratic Party. They have done so because they do not see national Democrats fighting for their interests. They see them fighting for special interests instead. And say what you want about Donald Trump. I could say a lot about Donald Trump. Most of it is not great. But one thing I will acknowledge, and that I think most average voters saw and acknowledged and liked, was that, he was not sending every sentence that came out of his mouth to 13 consultants to get their feedback on. He was not focus grouping, every word. He was not poll testing every speech. And now I don't like the things that he was saying in those speeches, but no one could argue that he was calculating in every word that was coming out of his mouth. And working class people who feel that government is inauthentic, not interested in their issues or their plight, not interested in their financial hardship, they see too many Democrats, and it's obvious. Like, you don't need a high-tech piece of radar equipment to understand when someone is BSing you. Most people are able to tell readily and obviously. And that is one of our problems as Democrats. When I ran for DNC chair, it was a long shot campaign. I ran for other reasons than winning, quite frankly. Lightning had to strike me 3 times if I was going to win that race. One of the reasons I ran is because I wanted to bring this issue to the forefront of that race, and I did. So here is what the new playbook should be. And by the way, you could apply this to the Republican Party as well if they want to keep a lot of these voters. We have to, as I've been talking about, pick the fights that matter to people. Most of the fights we have been picking for a very long time don't matter to most people. They matter to special interests. Second, similarly, we have to break from the consultants. I spoke a lot about this when I was running for the National Party post. We spend, as a party, I think the Republicans do as well, but lesser amounts. We spend literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every year in scarce resources to people to tell us what to say. And I think we should stop doing that. And we should talk like real human beings, and be ourselves. And then the last is show up everywhere. We had a small breakout group before this, me and maybe a dozen or so Hartwick students. And one of the questions that I received was, rural New Yorkers feel completely disconnected from their state government. Rural New Yorkers feel New York state government is not paying any attention to them. And what do we do about that? One, is it true, and what do we do about that? And it starts by showing up. You know, yes, there are 9 million people in New York City. I get it. It is the densest population center in the United States of America. When you're running for office statewide or nationally, people gravitate to where lots of votes are in one place. I understand that. But when I go to little towns in Orange County, and about half of my district geographically is rural, when I go to these little rural towns of 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people, I have people tell me, I can't remember the last time I've seen a Democratic elected official come to my community. You know, if there's one easy thing to fix, it's just start showing up. Like, there are other things that need to happen too, but if you're not even showing up and talking to people and pretending like you care about them, you should actually care about them. But if you're not even showing up, then how in the world could you expect anyone to vote for you? And so that's the other piece here as well. And so, you know, I put out a community survey. This is separate from the poll that I mentioned before, the benchmark poll. I put out a community survey every year. It's unscientific. My last one went out in December. And we provided a menu of about maybe 15 or 20 different issues and asked people to select what they felt the most pressing issue in Orange County is. Not state issues, but Orange County. And corruption, government corruption, came back as the most selected answer. And it speaks to, by the way, there's corruption in our housing policy, there's corruption in our utility policy, there's corruption in our healthcare policy, there's corruption in our education policy. And so, and people see it. And by the way, there's a hidden tax, there's a hidden corruption tax that we all pay. Do you know how much it costs? We're rebuilding, if you've been to Albany recently, there's construction fence around the Capitol building. And the state is reconstructing the exterior staircase of the Capitol building. The staircase has been closed for about 10 years. We finally got around to beginning construction late last year. Do you know how much this project to rebuild a staircase is going to cost? And how long it's going to take New York State government to rebuild a staircase? Any guesses? $70 million and 5 years. We built the Empire State Building in 13 months. The entire system is corrupted and broken and rigged, not just the most immediately, directly, personally felt policies, but when I say there's a corruption tax, when I say that there's a rigged system tax, the procurement process in New York that is tailored to provide favoritism to special interests that bid on these projects, and the review that's associated, that's what I'm talking about. And so, look, you know, I don't want to diminish social issues. I don't want to diminish issues like immigration, and certainly right now is a very deeply felt issue that we're actually dealing with in the state capitol, and we'll be taking up a series of bills to deal with in the coming weeks. But the bread and butter that people are feeling right now is not what's happening at the border. It's not these decades-long fights that go nowhere in the halls of the U.S. Congress. It's people can't afford to live. People like literally cannot live in this state right now. And the people who are running and winning and being successful have realized that you fix that problem by unrigging the system that we've been talking about, including the economic development system that we spent some time on. So I'm going to end there. I'd love to take some questions, but I'm really privileged and thankful that you all came and listened to me as a little old state senator from Orange County. Thank you, Hartwick and the broader community, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions that you have.
So who are they suing, Amazon and the IDA in Orange County? Like, what body are they suing? And isn't it kind of like suing one member of the family suing the other?
They're suing the monitor and the inspector general of the state of New York. The inspector general was the appointing authority for the monitor. So they went through an RFP, they selected the monitor, so they're a party to the lawsuit as well. But primarily they're suing the monitor. They're claiming that the veto is an illegal use of the monitor's authority, which it clearly is not. Yep. Monitor's one person. He comes from a large firm, and is the only IDA in the state with a state-appointed monitor. Yes.
This is the first monitor there's ever been in the U.S.?
Correct. In the U.S., I don't know. Every state does economic development differently. It's the first ever monitor in New York.
Thank you.
For an IDA.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for being here, and I would add you to the two representatives that you acknowledged as changing how they react and interact with their constituencies. So thank you for all your good work. I think it's important to have you tell us how the members of the IDA are appointed and other decision-making groups like that.
Yeah, it's an important question. You're right. And so the appointing authority for most IDAs is the governing board of either the county or the town, if it's a town IDA or a city IDA. And so if it's a county, it's the county legislature that makes these appointments. They usually, or they often come at the recommendation of the county executive, but does not have to. And so, typically these board members are themselves very well-connected individuals. The board members occasionally themselves have extreme conflicts of interest. And certainly we've seen that in Orange County and throughout the state, by the way. And so, and by the way, it's important to also note, these are volunteers. Most of them have their own full day jobs, and they don't have the bandwidth to do investigating and go stake out companies and call landlords and real estate agents. But you have full-time staff at these IDAs that should be doing work like that, in addition to the negotiating that traditionally does take place. The board members do not hold the staff accountable to that work, and that's where there's a breakdown. Instead, they just rubber stamp. It's a nice cushy appointment. They get to put it on a resume. In Orange County, they've kind of developed a bad name, thanks to me. Sorry, not sorry, IDA board. But in a lot of other communities, it's looked upon as sort of a posh appointment. And with all their insidery friends, it's it's a nice thing to talk about. And it's looked highly upon. And so in 99% of cases, though, they're just rubber stamps, not interested in doing the actual work. And partisan, yeah.
I have a question following up on the question that was asked earlier. So I applaud the work that you're doing at the local level. It's amazing. The race to the bottom, however, plays upon counties playing off against each other. Are you aware of any initiatives happening elsewhere, and is there any alliance to try to further thwart that race to the bottom?
Yeah, it's a great question. So a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, so we, in the Senate, we get to confirm many gubernatorial appointments. One such appointment is the CEO of Empire State Development, which is our state's economic development apparatus. And I basically held this nominee hostage for a number of months until I was able to extract very public commitments from this individual. Her name is Hope Knight. She's a very lovely person. One of the commitments that she has not lived up to, quite frankly, and I'm quite unhappy about, is she promised to engage with our neighboring states to see if we could all come up with basically a non-aggression pact, whereby, okay, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, you don't try and poach our companies, and we won't try and poach your companies as part of this race to the bottom that you're describing. And so my point is, there is quite a bit that I believe can be done. At the IDA level, I carry legislation that would regionalize IDAs. One IDA for every region of the state. One for the Hudson Valley, one for Central New York, one for the Capital Region, one for Long Island, because what we frequently see is this shopping around. Applicant will go to this county's IDA, see what kind of deal they can get. Then they'll go to the next county's IDA and say, well, they're willing to give us this deal. Can you do better? We'll bring our jobs to you instead. And that's what happens. And so yes, there's some legislation. There's some that just administratively has to be done with political will and leadership from economic development officials or the governor, who they respond to.
So I am going to shift topics a little bit with that slide when you're talking about the playbook, which I actually do agree with a good chunk of the points made. I also feel in a way that the one thing that's also lacking within both parties is professionalism. A lot of it's been more personal attacks against each other, and there are definitely more professional ways to disagree on something, or ways to say, hey, this idea from this part of this bill works really well, let's try and compromise. There's been a lack of that by both parties, and I think this playbook definitely works really well, but I also feel that professionalism is another key.
It's true. Yeah, a few of us talked about this prior to this lecture, and this issue came up about civility in politics. Politics is completely uncivil right now, as we all know, and it's self-perpetuating. It's a vicious cycle whereby, and it's set by examples, right? You know, our national leaders are examples at the end of the day. And whether it's the president, whether it's the nominees while running for president, certainly governors and other elected leaders as well. And when one leader becomes uncivil, the base of the other party demands that its leaders sort of do the same thing and stand up to them and fight back and call them names, and so it just perpetuates, right? Social media is a major problem on this issue. The example I shared about an hour ago, you know, like any politician, I have my trolls on social media, and the example I gave is I could cure cancer today, and I'd have trolls comment on my Facebook post, well, you didn't cure it yesterday, so I'm going to vote against you. And these very same individuals, I see some of them at community events. They're constituents. And look, it's First Amendment. Like, you can hate me. You can not vote for me. That's part of the game here. But I see some of these folks at community events and viciously calling me names on my social media pages and all sorts of terrible things. And then some of them will actually come up to me, shake my, good to see you, Senator. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so online politics, I think, has severely degraded civil discourse in this country. Not everyone, a lot of people are keyboard warriors. And so I don't know how to fix this. I'm not some national leader, and so I'm not the example that gets set. In Orange County, yes, for my slice of the universe, maybe. But I don't know how to fix this. I I believe the way actually it does get fixed is if we're able to nominate people to run for president that are civil and are respectful and are professional. The challenge is I just don't know in the current environment how someone like that wins a nomination, because the bases of the party largely do not want that. The individual that I shared as an example with the smaller group before was Andy Bashir is the governor in Kentucky. He's a Democrat, believe it or not, in Kentucky, running the state. And he's actually the most popular governor in the country. You would think a Democratic governor in deep red Kentucky, there's no way this person could be popular. He is the most popular governor in the country according to polls. And I would argue one of the reasons for that is he is the epitome of a Southern gentleman. He's civil, he disagrees without being disagreeable, and that is totally absent from the national stage right now. He's going to run for president. You know what he's polling at right now in very, very early, mind you, Democratic presidential polls? He's polling at 1%. Now that could obviously change, but I struggle to see how someone like him wins a nomination and then can set that tone, set that example for the rest of the country, because the bases in both parties are just so fervently looking for something different than that.
Hello, thank you so much for coming, for starters. But I don't know if this is just because, as a younger person, obviously we don't probably learn as much about taxes quite yet, but I just wanted to ask, especially because I feel like this issue isn't, like, I haven't heard much about this issue personally, and especially since I feel like it's a root of a lot of economic problems that people do complain about. I was wondering, for one, why do you think that this isn't brought up as much as it should be? And for two, how do you think that this issue could be more wider spread, like informed about?
It's a great question. So even many of my own colleagues hardly know anything about how these agencies work. You know, I have, it's 28 colleagues in the state Senate who represent New York City. New York City has one IDA for the entire city. And those 27 colleagues, with maybe one or two exceptions, have little awareness of what happens at the New York City's IDA. Outside the city, it's more of a mixed bag. Why there's that lack of interest, I don't know, because I believe, as you can tell, that this is a deeply rooted problem that has a significant impact on taxpayers and our quality of life here in New York. Maybe it's just not sexy. I don't know. I really don't know what it takes to have something like this catch the focused attention of not only elected officials, obviously, but the public. I think it's incumbent upon elected officials, as I have, to elevate issues like this. And so I think it does start with the political class, the representatives in these communities. It's just not a top priority for hardly any of my colleagues. There are 2 or 3 exceptions who feel very strongly about IDAs and economic development reform, like I do, that I serve with. But we are in the deep minority right now. And look, I work every day to change that. I am persistent, if not anything else, when I'm in the state capitol. And I beat this drum almost every single day, to the point where my colleagues sometimes ask me to okay, we get it, please stop. But I don't think they do get it yet, so I'm not stopping. So I need them to become engaged so that they go back home and they engage their constituents. And my hope, again, is if we can get this right in Orange County in the next few weeks, that this can be a model for the entire state. And then now we're talking, look, my priority parochially is my district and the people that I represent, but I want to fix this desperately everywhere in New York. and it requires, I believe, or it is compelling if I can point to something. We are doing this in Orange County. This is now state law in Orange County. Here's why it's good for the entire state. Right now, I can't point to any place in New York that is doing this right. We're trying to get it right so we can point to it for everybody else. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.